Welcome back to the show, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, heroes and villains. I'm your host, Deshaun Fauntleroy. I know your time is precious, so we're going to get right into today's show. Old school coaching versus new school coaching. Coaching styles. It's been debated, it's been argued by administrators, coaches, psychologists, parents, and even athletes themselves. At the end of the day, our job is to help the athlete grow as a person and as a competitor. How do modern coaches differ from coaches of the past? Do they differ at all? What can coaches do to reach their athletes and promote optimum performance? How can a coach earn respect from athletes without using negative responses and punishments? Which coaching style or styles do athletes respond to best? These are some of the things that we're going to tackle in this episode. We're also going to discuss coaching philosophy. We're going to discuss coaching styles and give you, the listener, whether you're a parent, coach, or athlete, some answers to deal with both types of coaches. Now, I have some wonderful guests coming on the show today. I have Sean Jenkins out of Stockton, California, and Leland Johnson out of Portland, Oregon. Sean, I want you to introduce yourself. Let the audience know what your background is, what your credentials are, and then from there, I want you to introduce yourself to Leland and let the audience know what your background is, what type of athletes are you training today, and where they're at as far as a Division I perspective. Sean, tell us what's going on with you.
Well, I originally hail from the great city of Oakland, more affectionately known as the town. I am a certified national athletic trainer through the National Athletic Trainers Association. Also, I'm a certified strength and conditioning specialist through the NSCA, which is the National Strength and Conditioning Association. I have a master's degree in kinesiology from Cal State Hayward here in California, and I also serve as the chair for the NSCA Diversity Committee, and I'm on the advisory board for the NordiCal branch of the NSCA. I work at Lawrence Livermore Lab, where I'm part of the fitness staff there who trains the security police officers to protect very valuable materials. Also have a business here in Stockton called Stockton Sports Performance, where the majority of the individuals I work with are young athletes. And working with the young athletes is I've come to embrace, because that's just where I think my needs are best met. In 2011, I did an internship with the Oakland Raiders and worked with the professional athletes. So I know my passion and my drive is working with the younger folks. So that's just a little bit about me and who I am.
Leland, let the audience know who you are.
Well, I'm Leland Johnson. I'm a parent, I'm a coach, and I'm a trainer. I currently have probably 5 to 6 players that are on the Division I, II, and III level. I have a young point guard by the name of Abdishek who's at Lawrence College. I have a young senior who will be going to Western Oregon on a football scholarship, Majid Rufai. Another kid there, Rodney Hamshell, who's redshirting and should be an impact player on the basketball team next year. And on the Division I level, I have 3 players in the Mountain West Conference, India Fly at New Mexico, Jazz Johnson, who should be the starting point guard next year. Everything goes right at Reno, and my nephew, K.O.D. Rufai, who's a defensive end, a sophomore defensive end at Boise State.
Excellent. Now, as I said before, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be discussing old school coaching versus new school coaching. And for your intellectual absorption, there might be a cuss word or F-bomb here and there as we describe certain coaching styles. Now, I read a lot. I know Sean Jenkins reads a lot. Leland reads a lot. We do a significant amount of research. And I don't want to offend anybody, but I think it's easy for a person who may have a PhD or a person with a master's working on their dissertation to write about old school coaching versus new school coaching. But if you haven't been in the industry in the last 10 to 15 years, things change. So I want to give a prelude to that, because if you're a coach, maybe you just have an undergrad degree, or maybe you've been volunteering and you turned into assistant for the last 15 years. You've seen how things change because you're actually in the field to observe, examine, experiment, and explain your coaching philosophy. So I want to give a shout out to both sides, the academic side, but also the people that are in the field every day. Now, Sean, I wanted to bring you on first. What are some of the characteristics of old school coaching?
Well, old school coaches, for the most part, that if any of us remember, because I'm 52, so I figure, I fall underneath these type of coaches, the ones who intimidated through by fear. They had this command style. It was more of do it because I said. There was no explanation for the most part. Some even used demeaning tactics as motivation, and it wasn't to any particular player. That was just to any player who was under their watch. Of course, it's my way. Or the old school coaches is one way, my way, and that's the only way we're going to do things. There was no give and take as compared to the new school coaches, where they allow some players to have a little input, and I guess over a period of time, their relationship did develop, but that was not their focus. I guess you spend enough time with a player, some relationships going to develop, but with the old school coaches, that was not a focal point of their coaching style. So I would say that was pretty much non-existent or not the forefront of their coaching.
Now, and this definitely is not to blast what would be considered or labeled old school coaches, because I know Leland, myself, and I know Sean, you've had a chance to check out Friday Night Tykes. Leland, we've discussed Snoop's football youth league, who has a documentary on Netflix. What's your perception or take on so-called old school coaches, Leland?
Well, like me and Deshaun, me and my cousin Sean Jenkins is my cousin. If you folks out there don't know, but me and him, we got to talking about this particular subject one day, and I think both of our analysis or what we ended up saying was basically you just got to be a chameleon. You know what I'm saying? Some kids will they need that type of enforcement, and some kids are more cerebral, and sometimes it depends on the socioeconomic background of the particular kids that you're dealing with. Kids up here in Lake Oswego aren't going to deal with the same issues that kids in Oakland, California are going to deal with. So those coaches have to coach those players a certain way. I hate to say it, but in the more the areas that do well financially, it's more of a cerebral type of approach when you coach those kids. Because of the other situations, sometimes there's a single parent, sometimes there's no parents in the house. You know what I'm saying? Some kids are being raised by grandparents. You know what I'm saying? So they're really looking for some type of male bonding, or some type of male direction, or direction from an older male. And sometimes you have to give them a little tough love in order to bring them along.
On the Snoop Youth Football League documentary, I know there was one particular coach. He has a hip hop background, and he talked about how he came in being nice and friendly to the kids, and then he had to change his dialogue because he's dealing with inner city kids from Los Angeles and surrounding neighborhoods, to where you hear him cussing a lot. You hear him being overly aggressive, and he was like, if you don't cuss them out, they'll cuss you out. And you were telling me about that. What's your perspective or perception on that gentleman as a coach and what he's doing with the kids?
I look at, well, let me say this. I think what we don't do with coaches and trainers, and what we should judge them on, is what are you producing? What are you producing? If this individual's, after this kid goes through his curriculum or he plays for his team, if this kid comes out a better person, he's a little bit more responsible. He knows how to treat people in the public. He still may be rough around the edges, but he basically, he's an obedient kid. Well, I don't see nothing wrong with what that guy is doing. Now, there are situations where people are really selfish and they tend to, uh, 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 you know, kind of deal with kids in a negative way, because of lack of training, lack of understanding on their part or impatience. I'm not saying that there aren't those situations out there, but I think what we should do is we should kind of start looking at these guys and start saying, okay, who are you producing and who are you working with or who have you worked with? And just like now in this state, if I wanted to be a jerk, I could pretty much ask any trainer out there. Are there any trainers out there that have over 3 to 4 players on the Division I level? And there are none. There are absolutely none. And when I say players on the Division I level, I'm talking about kids that you have worked with over the years, not some kid that's already developed. And because you have a nice facility, I can offer you more than what this gentleman can offer you. Not that. I'm talking about coaches and trainers, just like Sean, that take kids who or semi-pro players or college guys who are on that cusp. They may not be the star, but because you love development, you've taken that task on, and it's you want to see this kid better.
So it sounds like you can be an old school coach, and it's not so much definitely about winning and losing. It's like, what have you done for the kid as far as helping them develop their character, helping them develop their leadership abilities, and just being better in their community. Now, Sean, I know you touch on this a lot. What's your take on what Leland is expressing right now?
Well, like he was right. You need to be a chameleon. You need to develop a relationship with your players. And when I mean relationship, I'm not, actually some kids may need a hug, but if you don't want to be perceived as soft that they can run over you and they can do whatever they want. The bottom line is you have to have, coaches have their program, and the kids have to come in that program and do what they need to do so that the business can be they can take care of business. So it's definitely a case where some kids may need a little in your face. I, for one, I'm not big on cursing kids out, and my take on that is, especially the kids that I've seen, that I've worked with, they come from that environment where that's all they hear. And I just want to give them something a little different. I'm looking at the big picture. Once they're out of that environment, you're not going to hear all of that. When you start working, you're in the workforce, you're not going to hear all that. So I want to be, just give them something different, because some of them, they live in some really tough environments. So I don't think I need to cuss at the kids to get my point across. Have I been stern? Yes. Have I gotten a couple of kids' face? Yes. But I'm trying not to demean them. I'm trying to actually develop a relationship so that they understand that I'm there for them and that I care. Because once they understand that I care and I have their best interests at heart, then they tend to let their guard down, and then the dialogue can flow both ways. So by all means, there's a little bit that can be taken from both coaching styles, but it's up to the coach. It's up to the strength coach to figure out what makes a kid tick, because at the end of the day, you want to maximize their performance for the good of the team.
I like what you're saying, man, because it sounds like us as coaches, we can't coach every kid the same way, because kids have different learning styles, whether they're auditory, visual, or kinesthetic, and it could depend on the cueing, and that can transition to cueing. You can't cue them all the same or teach the same drills to some, because they might pick it up differently or not the same. But I like what you're saying, because sometimes on game day, parents or spectators just might see a coach yelling, but then at the end of practice, they don't see what might be considered that old school coach saying, you know what, I love you, great effing job today, and things like that. So, Leland, I know we've talked about this subject as far as like the old school coaching style, if we're going to label it that, as like them dudes showing love and being lovable at the same time.
Let's say this, man. Let's do this, okay? Parents, if your kid is an elite athlete, okay, if your son is an elite athlete, he has tough skin, and there has been a coach that's cursed at him. There has been a coach that has talked to him in a, what you would think in a demeaning fashion. Um, I sit my kids down and I say this old saying that we used to say when we were young, and we actually use this as as a defense mechanism. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. We have become such a sensitive society that I've caught myself. Excuse me for saying this, but I was somebody was in traffic and they were actually in the wrong, and they honked their horn at me. And when they got by my car, he said he rolled down his window. He looked at me. He said, "You nigger." I said, "Sometimes I am." And he looked at me. And bro, you should have seen the confusing look on his face, bro. And yeah, because I said sometimes I am. The definition of a nigga is somebody is an ignorant person, and sometimes I am ignorant and I don't know. You know what I'm saying? So, hey, I'm if that's what you want to call me, then fine. But I'm not gonna let that. I ain't gonna let your word and what your intent with it was. I'm not gonna let it affect me. You know what I'm saying? And I think if you, as a trainer and a coach, you kind of start letting your kid or try to start using these type of tactics with your kids, sooner or later, they become immune to all that, all the language and all of it. Only thing that they tend to understand is, was I successful or did I do it right? You know what I'm saying?
You know what? I like what you're saying as far as like insults and words, because, you hear the word fat ass, big, or lard ass. And I'm sure Biggie Smalls has been called that. I'm sure Big Pun, Fat Joe, and Rick Ross, and them is some of the dopest and best rappers in history. They dress fly, they had major swag, and they went on to become successful. And they didn't let words like that stop them from being successful. So I think at certain times you could use that energy to fuel you.
While
you know
we
what
talk
I mean?
on that subject, I have something I wanted. There was a time when Jazz came to me as a youngster, and he was crying in tears. He said, "Daddy," I said, "What?" He said, "These kids today, they called me fat in school." And I said, and you know how I'm built, Sean. I'm a rather heavy guy. You know what I'm saying? But I'm dimension wise, I'm not built like a fat guy. But I told him, I said, they call me fat. Some of these skinny dudes call me fat. And he looked at me and said, "No." He said, "No, you're not fat."
Mm-hmm.
He said, "You strong." I said, "Well, you're me." And he said, I said, "No, you me, dude." I said, you see how you, when you tussle in you and people tell you to stop being rough because you're stronger than everybody else?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "That's what you are." I said, "You wear that with pride, dog." Now look, about 3 years later, we're playing in a tournament and we actually won the tournament. Okay. And him and this other kid on my team named Bailey, who's an overweight kid, little white kid on the team, really smart, bright kid, right? But he was one of those that got teased about his weight and all that. So him and Jazz, I seen them over there in the corner and they was doing something. And I'm like, what are they asses over there doing, man? And they come back with these sweatshirts on, right? And he said, "Dad, look." And he turned around and on the back of the shirts had Beef Brothers. Hey, dude, I smiled. And as you can see, I still remember that story because I understood the huge picture. And the huge picture was, he was saying to me, anything anybody says negative about me, I'm gonna wear it like it's a new outfit, and whether they like it or not, it don't matter. And if you take the time to teach a kid, your kid can learn that same lesson. And it wasn't something that
You know
it
what?
took me months and years to teach him. It was just a few examples, and he got it.
You know what, Leland? I remember playing with Kenny Austin before we went and played some arena football. And one day I had ran a terror. He told me to run the route. You know, he told me twice to run the route, and I ran the wrong route. He was like, Font, you got shit for brains. You know, and all I could do was start laughing. I just started laughing, and I didn't take it personal. He was like, now get your ass back in there and run the route. You know, now I could have took it offensive, but had I did that and acted emotional at that point in time, it wouldn't have got me to
No,
where I wanted to
and
be.
I
You
would have
know,
said you was
I
tripping.
want to switch. Right, right. Now, I want to switch lanes. Sean, let us know about some of the characteristics or personality dispositions of the new school coaching.
As I mentioned a little bit in the previous when we were talking about old school coaching, the new school coaches they're the ones now who are seeking to relate to the players. They want to know a little bit more about them other than their athleticism, what makes them tick, what their community's like, what their homes life like is like, just things outside of sports. So they're looking at a way that they can bond and connect with a player and use that to their advantage to get the most out of a player. The new school coaches realize it's not one size fits all. So as we talked about earlier, they look at each player as an individual and how to connect with that person where they are mentally. Uh, there's a difference between stern and offensive, and I think sometimes, and I've seen it, and I've had coaches, they go back and forth. They can be stern, but they're not offensive. But sometimes they can be offensive. But it's not always. It's not constant. Just as one story, I remember I had one baseball coach, and honestly, for the life of me, I cannot remember anything he taught me. But the one thing I remember one time after practice was that he used the F word 41 times during his talk. During his talk to us, I remember that 41 times. I was counting. And so he was an old school coach. The new school coaches, there's a lot of give and take. They actually seek the players' input. They want to know, what's going on, so that way they have a buy-in in the program, so they can take ownership of it. So it's like it's theirs. So they're going to take care of it a little bit more. For example, a coach like Phil Jackson, he was really laid back. He had a lot of good relationships with most of his players. He would even give them books, and those books were based on their personality. So the new school coaches, they understand that today's player, some of them just don't want to take things at face value. They want to know why I'm doing this. How is this going to help me? So now a lot of them are explaining instead of the old school coach way of just do it because I said so. Now they're saying, well, the reason you want to do this is because X, Y, and Z. And then the player goes, oh, okay. And then, they do it and they have a reason behind of why they're doing something. So as Leland said earlier, these guys are a lot more cerebral. Now, I know some of them do still have some old school ways, but they combine the two. And if you actually look at some of the more popular coaches, for one that comes to mind is Coach Popovich. I mean, one time he's very cerebral at times. Other times he's getting on you, and and you see it.
But
Look at his success rate and look at his
also, I'll say
players
this about
and how
Pop,
they
and
enjoy playing for
I'm
him.
only going to say this because I know Ime Udoka. Pop knows how to implement to his assistant coaches. He knows what he's good at and what he's not good at. He knows what his assistants are good at, and he lets them do their thing also. So that's another thing. Today's coaches should know how. And I'm not saying all of them do, but some of them should know what they're good at and what they're not good at. You know what I'm saying? Just like an athlete, you need to know what you're good at and what you're not good at. And if you want to be a good coach, then you'll work on the things that you're not good at, as opposed to working always using the things that you're good at. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, Sean is right. You gotta use both tactics. You gotta use both ways. But I want to kind of compound on something that he was saying, that when he said that today's coach likes to give at the athlete the ownership of what they're doing. I'll compound that and say this though. There are a lot of immature athletes today, and there are a lot of athletes that want to do stuff half-ass. Okay, I got a player whose dad walked it, and he's a player here currently in the state. Pretty good player. He'll be a junior next year. He doesn't have any offers, anything like that, but he's one of the top players in the state. So I told his dad what he basically needs to do. Dad comes into the gym. He says, "Hey, man, I know we talked about what we need to do. He wants to do the AAU thing. And, I know we had a plan. I just wanted to come face to face and tell you." I looked at him. I said, "No problem. No problem." Now, check this out. The other day I was on Facebook, and I see on Facebook the kid was in Disneyland with his girlfriend. This is what we're dealing with a lot. We're dealing with this a lot today. You know what I'm saying?
But I want to
go ahead.
clarify one thing though. You can't
Right.
if a kid is immature, you're not going to entrust him with certain things. Like I said, you got to deal with him at the level he is. So if a kid is immature and he can't handle it, why put him in a situation to fail? And that's where where it comes vital for the coach to know what to do, what not to do in dealing with each individual player.
I want to expound on what Leland was saying, because what it sounds like, Leland, to me, man, is like when I first meet a player, I talk to them and their parents at the same time about whether it's a young boy or a young man or young woman. I want to know what your hopes and dreams are. I want to know what your pains and fears are, and I want to know what your barriers and limitations are. Because once we have a significant conversation and what I would call an authentic conversation, now we have the foundation for discipline. You can't run and hide when you told me you wanted to do X, Y, and Z. Now, if you told me you want to do these things, we have to start at the beginning. Now, if I see you in Disneyland, and I tell people, sometimes you're going to have to sacrifice summers. You're going to have to sacrifice Christmas vacation. You're going to have to sacrifice spring break, because if you're average or you're in the middle of the road, or if your grades are lacking, we have to do things to catch up. If you're a 5'9" student, and I know Leland talks about his son, Jazz, who's at University of Nevada, Reno, he's 5'9". He really shouldn't be playing Division I basketball because he's taken to strength training and physical development. He never gets injured. It's added to his mental toughness. So now he's almost like a 6'1" athlete. And on top of that, his grade point average being, close to 4.0 coming out of high school. So there are things that can make up the difference if you know what your goals are, and we set those expectations and start marching towards it a little bit at a time. And like Leland said, it's not always easy. You're going to have to suffer a little bit. We've talked about that before.
And I used to, with Jazz, I used to sell him kind of short, and he kind of got me out of this round when he was like 15, 16. I would see a kid and I'd go, "Hey man, you remind me of my son. Hey man, you remind me of my son. Hey man, you remind me of my son." I would do that to kids, right? And time again, that kid wouldn't last, until I had to take a step back and just look and go, you know what? When I look at Jazz's body at work, man, he does work hard. He is a hardworking kid. And there are very few kids out there that are dedicated like that. When I get athletes that kind of play with my intelligence, and they tell me they want to do it and then they don't do it, I selfishly do this. I really don't worry about it because I turn to mine and I go, I know he'll do it. I selfishly do that. And that probably happens, probably about 8 times a month. You know, where if a kid, if I'm trying to get you to do something and you try to tune me out, okay, tune me out. I don't worry about it because I know that in a minute, a person is going to walk in that gym. Then when I ask him to work hard, or when I ask him to take 10 steps to the left, he'll take 10 steps so goddamn hard, he'll be sweating. Excuse my language. He'll be sweating. You understand me? So, you know, I love the fact that he has a work ethic. You know, I've had even coaches walk up to me, stupidly walk up to me, Deshaun, and go, "Hey man, I had Jazz do this drill, and you know, he did the drill at like 90%. I couldn't believe it." And I just look at the coach and go, "Oh, really? Oh, okay. All right." You know?
I want to switch lanes, gentlemen. You know, I'm looking at from myself. I'm looking at this from 3 different perspectives. You know, from a strength and conditioning standpoint. From a strength and conditioning standpoint, my philosophy as a coach is to show you and teach you the fundamentals, especially if I get you at 12 or 13 years old. By the time you're a senior, you've mastered the fundamentals of strength training as far as working with your body weight, working with barbells, working with kettlebells, to where once you get to college, you can survive in a college strength and conditioning program. And when I say master the fundamentals, I'm talking about working with just a bar
But Deshaun,
and being able to do things properly and efficiently.
Deshaun, one of the big problems with that is this.
Yes.
Head coaches have this thing with strength coaches. Okay? Strength coaches, they actually build the relationship with the athlete. Because they're with that athlete on an everyday basis, and actually it's probably where they start to work on a weak point in their game. It starts with that guy. It doesn't start with the head coach.
It does,
and that's why I was saying part of this problem is head coaches become kind of jealous of the time that these kids spend with strength coaches, and they feel like they're going to lose some type of control. And I'm pretty sure my cousin Sean has been in that situation before, and because we've talked about it, and I would sit back and go, did he actually question? Yeah, he actually questioned me. Sean actually worked for a high school coach who Sean was telling the kid how to do something, and the coach comes in and tries to correct what Sean was doing. And I was like, and I said, Sean,
old school coach.
Oh shit.
No. And to make that story even greater, the previous year he wasn't even the head coach, but he came to me wanting to pick my brain about strength conditioning to make sure he was doing things correctly. But when he became the head coach, all of a sudden he knew how to strength condition. All of a sudden, in less than a year. That's the part that
Sean,
threw me off.
I wanted to ask you too, and I asked both of you guys. Sean, as a strength coach, whether it's strength and conditioning or it's rehab, prehab, rehab, what is your coaching philosophy when it comes to working with the student athlete?
Well, you touched on it earlier. The bottom line is technique. You want to teach it properly. You want to make sure that the group that you're working with, for instance, if I'm working with some adolescent kids, they're not small adults. So that program has to be tailored to that individual or that group. I can't take a college program and implement it to these young kids. So wherever they are developmentally, I have to come up with a program that meets them where they are. So again, technique over anything. The last thing you want to do is injure a kid. So if I'm working on technique, I see my job, like you said, as they matriculate to high school if they have a solid strength conditioning program in the high school, I want them to be able to have the basics down so that they can hit the ground running. I see it far too often, especially in the high school level. A lot of kids, they have no idea on how to lift correctly. They don't know how to do a snatch, squat, clean.
Can't jump rope.
I mean, some of them can't even skip. I've had kids who couldn't even skip, but then jump rope. And when they go to college, some of these kids are hitting the ground running. Like when I go to national strength condition conferences, some of these coaches in the South and in the East, where a strength coach is actually a vital part of the program, where schools are requiring that they have a strength coach. It's not just some DB coaches come up with a program, but you actually have a strength coach in the school who are working with all athletes, all levels, all sports, male and female. But so often here in California, that's not the case. It's unusual to have a strength coach at a high school out here. But so it's important for a kid to get the basics down to understand, what they need to do. Now, also with that, if a kid has the basics and they've developed their bodies, the research has shown that there's less chance that an injury is going to happen, or it'll be less catastrophic because the kid has developed their body in such a way that the injury is not that impactful. Or if they become injured, they come back quicker as opposed to someone who's weaker. So there's so many benefits to a strength conditioning program, but it has to be taught properly. And I think a lot of parents entrust their kids to people who really don't understand and who do not don't teach it properly, especially at the lower levels. I mean, they like all these bells and whistles, these fancy things, but if you don't have the basics down, you're basically training over a deficiency. And when you do that, something's going to give.
Yeah, Leland, I know you specialize in working with basketball and football athletes, working with student athletes. What's your coaching philosophy?
This is what I do to test myself. This is one thing. When we went on Jazz's visit, I got to meet the strength coach, got to meet the coaches, assistant coaches, and I immediately, I told him, I say, man, this is where he's going to be when he comes back. And I think at first they were looking at me like, okay, this is his dad. He believes in his son. And when Jazz came back and he started when he ran the mile and he was the top, had the best time in the mile, or when he ran the 3-minute course and he had the second best time in that, or when he did his deadlifts or his squats, he was maxing out higher than anybody that was on the team. The beautiful part about that whole coaching staff over in Nevada is they noticed that the work that me and Jazz had put in before Jazz got there. And I look at that as kudos to what I do. I think that's more than money to me. When I get someone who's who's on that level, and just now we're in a situation where Jazz wants to come home for the summer, and he told his head coach, he said, "Well, I know we're gonna be putting in a lot of work. Is it cool if I just put the work in with my dad?" And he didn't balk. He was like, "Yeah, sure." And when I get a coach that responds to me like that, I know I'm doing the right thing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, socially, my philosophy working with the student athlete is to get to know them and to get to know their parents as soon as they come to the door. And y'all have heard me express this before. I want to know what your hopes and dreams are. I want to know what your pains and fears are. I want to know what your barriers and limitations are. And I know, Leland, you like me, sometimes we're often the last resort because they went to the bells and whistles first. And then a year or two down the line, they're saying, I wish I found you 3 years ago. And now it's their senior year. I can't help that. But what I can do is put you in a position that the things I'm teaching you, if you had to go over to Iraq or around the world and fight in the military, you're going to have certain qualities, characteristics about yourself that you can stand up. You're going to get in the college classroom. You're going to lead the group discussion. You're going to help with the presentation, because we're talking about character development and leadership. This leads me back to you, Sean. What are some of your coaching philosophies when we're thinking about more of a social dynamic or emotional intelligence aspect?
Well, I look at my job as a strength coach, not only to develop these athletes for their sport, because if we look at the statistics, we know that everyone doesn't make it to the league. So my thing is, I want, in addition to them becoming the best athlete that they can be, I want them to be a good person. I want them to have an outlook on life where they're not solely just about themselves, that they looking to help their fellow man, and that they're that there's something bigger than athletics. So I want them to I want them to develop that way. I've started a thing now where I've started handing out books. I guess some books that I read, and I just wish that when I was growing up that someone had given that to me. So now I'll give a player a book, give them something to read, just something outside of sports that somewhere down the line it may help them. They may not even pick the book up, but one day they may, or they may hear about it and say, "Oh, I have."
And that's a part of when you say that, if you're going to teach a kid, teach them how to do it the right way. Because there are so many athletes today they put in work, but they may be putting in the work in the wrong way. And when I say the wrong way is, you kind of know it, because in their latter years, after they're done playing, some guys, they can barely stand up. I have a buddy named Marcus Royster who at times was a beast in the weight room, you know what I'm saying? But I always felt like he never lifted the safe way. And sometimes when I look at him today, I kind of feel bad because, Deshaun, he can barely walk. You know what I'm saying? He has this funny gait to his walk now. And a lot of that is because of his years of playing and not taking care of his body, and probably not lifting right, not doing things the right way.
I'll touch on that, because one of the characteristics of a new school coaching is lead by example. I don't lift a lot of weight like I used to, but I still clean, I still snatch, I still jerk, sometimes with the bar, and just 10 to 25 pounds on each barbell. So sometimes, my personal philosophy, I feel that I'm still young. I have knee tweaks that I deal with. I have hip mobility issues, but I work through that. I work my hips every time I go into the weight room for like 30 to 40 minutes. And I think as we get older, you have to keep that lifestyle. So that's, one of my personal philosophies. So I agree with you 100%. Sean, what would you say, to the disciplinarian or the authoritarian in the community that's a good guy that maybe comes out and volunteers as a coach, like you might see on a Friday Night Tykes or Snoop's football documentary? What would you say to those coaches in regards to education? Maybe they don't have a master's degree, maybe they didn't have an undergrad, but now they're coaching youth sports, and they have the best of intentions.
I've been on this conference call, this leadership conference call with some young men through under the leadership of Ben Wax. And one of the guys always gets on, I won't say always, but he gets on, we're on a call, and from time to time, he'll say, I'm not educated like you guys, because I'm on the call with guys with PhDs, masters, and business owners, and their businesses are doing well. But we always tell them, we say, hey, hold up. You are educated. Just because you don't have a PhD or master's, you've been through some stuff in life that we haven't been through, that you can give to somebody, and you can speak to them. That's going to help them much further along than our master's or PhD. So you are educated. You're just educated in a different way, in the school of hard knocks, and what your experiences are. So with that, there are some coaches that have they've elevated themselves up from maybe a bad situation. Maybe they see in those kids themselves. Maybe they had some talent growing up, but they were listening to the wrong people in the wrong crowd. So they have a lot to offer. And with that, that's a way that they connect with the kid. They also have to keep in mind that this is just a snapshot in time. Where do you want this kid to go? What kind of person do you want them to be? So you're developing them in a way that you don't want them, for this particular coach, you don't want him or her to go in the direction you're in. You want them to you want them to navigate those pitfalls so that way they don't have to deal with some of the stuff that you've dealt with, because just because the coach made out of it doesn't mean that individual is going to make it out of it. So they have a lot to offer. But like Leland said, comes a point where you can use that information, but at the same time, educate yourself on what you're trying to do on the field of the court. I mean, in this day and age with this internet, you can find anything you want. You can read an article, you can watch a video, you can go and talk to people. And so you constantly have to educate yourself, because what was good yesterday is not going to be good today. So with that coach's experience coming up, and now they're educating themselves on different techniques, different approaches, ways to disseminate the information. Actually, they're honestly probably in a greater position than somebody who's just uh, educated scholastically, because they've had the experience, and you combine that with the scholastic part and the information that they've read, man, they're ahead of the game.
This podcast provides the student athlete and their support team with the systems and strategies to help them break through all barriers and limitations. My goal with these audio podcasts is to interview parents and coaches and ask them questions about their journey in the realm of developing student athletes. I like for them to discuss their tips and strategies that they have learned over their time being a parent and coach. Ultimately, I like to create a platform to share information, experience, and dialogue to better help our student athletes. Financial support from you, the listeners, is what keeps this going. And the podcast really needs more funding to grow, not only to become financially stable, but to grow. A budget to interview guests globally instead of locally is one of my dreams. Because of the intimate nature of the interviews, in-person conversations are sometimes necessary. Your support will allow me to dedicate more time to working on the show. It will allow me to hire an audio editor, sound engineer, a videographer, publicist, and a social media manager. Put simply, the more you help out, the better quality of podcasts I can produce and develop for you. In addition, I'll be able to start producing monthly webinars on topics suggested by Patreon supporters. So to support the Sports Mastery podcast, I've created a Patreon page. Go check this out at patreon.com/sportsmastery.